Hello, and welcome back to the test screening. My name is Chloe.
And my name is Billy.
How are you, Billy? It's been a minute.
It's been a minute, and there have been plenty of great releases to catch up on. I am buzzing after the most anticipated cinematic weekend of the entire year.
Honestly, the hype was real. The hype was real. I knew that we had to come back to cover these films because otherwise it would actually kill me inside. We had to talk about this weekend and all of the things that have been released.
It would be rude not to.
Honestly, it would. And before we kind of jump into the reviews, very obviously talking about the whole Barbenheimer phenomenon, Barbie and Oppenheimer being released at the same time. And you got me thinking about the films that are completely different were released at the same time, and you've come up with some examples. So hit me. What are some examples of very different films?
Christopher Nolan, again, he seems to have a penchant for this sort of thing. The one that really tickled me was The Dark Knight and Mamma Mia being released at the same time. The Dark Mama.
The Dark Mama.
That tickled me very much.
They missed a trick not using that in the marketing. Just playing ABBA over the Dark Knight trailer. That would have been...
Oh, they really did. You know, the Joker going, "Why so serious?" while Dancing Queen is on in the background. I mean, that could not have been more iconic. If only they had conceived that at the time.
It's a weird phenomenon, the way that it's happened. Because I think it's just because they're so different. But I also think it's because it's Barbie, specifically because it's Barbie. Like because it's so silly, it's so nostalgic, and it's so out there and massive. And then Oppenheimer is this other big blockbuster. It's a perfect storm because they could not go together less, and that makes it just perfect. I'm still not tired of the memes. Usually by this point I'm getting sick of this kind of stuff coming up on my timeline. I'm not tired of this yet. If I see like Barbie and Oppenheimer related content, I'm still excited.
They keep finding ways to just put fresh spins on the humour. My favourite is the one where it's a woman in her pink bedroom and she's kind of like sat on her bed and like an explosion blows out the wall of her bedroom, and the caption is, when the Oppenheimer bomb goes off in the middle of the Barbie screening thing.
Have you seen that screening where they had the Barbie subtitles over Oppenheimer?
Yeah, that just... I mean, could it have potentially been on purpose? I mean, for that mistake to happen and it to be the Barbie subtitles.
It was not a mistake. 100% someone did that on purpose. You could not convince me otherwise. And will you be going to see... Will you be going to see the next big double bill, Paw Patrol?
Saw Patrol?
It's the Saw film.
I mean, I know
the new Saw film and Paw Patrol. They're being released on the same day. This is the next big thing. This is the next one. Will you be there?
I mean, that's an even sharper contrast. I mean, because of our duties and our loyalty to the fans and our audience.
Yeah.
I mean, I may have to, but I'm historically not a Saw fan. Saw 1 is a good movie. That is about it. I'm not sure I want to put myself through the gratuitous torture, and I have a sneaking suspicion that I'm not quite the target audience that Paw Patrol is marketed towards.
Who knows? I mean, I didn't think that Barbie was going to be a 12A. That shocked me. But it was right. It was right for it because it got the right audience and they were able to do whatever they wanted with it. It was the right thing. But in my screening, there were like 4-year-olds or people that had been brought by their parents who got bored very quickly and the jokes just went completely over there. So who knows? Maybe we'll get like an angsty Paw Patrol film that's a 12A and gets really misjudged by everybody.
You know that meme trend online where it's the Linkin Park song and it's like when movies were released in 2009 and like the rock chorus busts in over the cut to the credits. It's like maybe they'll do that with Paw Patrol.
Oh my God, that would be
Yeah,
cinematic history is being made as
it
we
would.
speak.
A total
Um,
a total landmark. And there were a lot of kids in my screening of Barbie as well. And there was a particularly funny moment where, obviously no plot spoilers, but there's when it's all kicking off at the climax of Barbie towards the back end, and there's some action going on and some big song and dance numbers. I just right in the middle of the action, I just heard this little girl in the row behind me just lean in and say to her mum, "Mummy, what's happening?" And this kid has not understood
oh God.
a single second of what
Oh,
has happened
bless
on
her.
screen the past 2 hours.
She did not think that was the Barbie movie. She did not think that was the Barbie movie that she was getting that day. But here we are. So on that topic, let's get into it. Let's get into the Barbenheimer of it all. And we'll start actually with Oppenheimer, because this is one that I haven't seen. I didn't do the double bill. I couldn't stomach it. It was just too much screen time. Oppenheimer's like a 3-hour movie. I can't do that to myself. So I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this, considering all of the hype. Or do you think that Barbie has aided the hype and Oppenheimer isn't actually deserving of the hype? What's your thoughts?
I do think in terms of box office revenue and sales, that Barbie has definitely aided Oppenheimer's sort of ascension up the box office charts and the box office revenue in Christopher Nolan's filmography. I mean, on paper, as much as Christopher Nolan, as far as Hollywood directors go, is a household name, cinematically and structure-wise, Oppenheimer is a much tougher sell on paper. 3-hour, largely dialogue-driven historical drama that's very kind of performance-based about very heavy subject. The making of the bomb that would later become one of the greatest, I think, atrocities in war and in human history. Really, the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It doesn't exactly scream crowd pleaser, does it? But given the fact that the memes and the social media storm has sort of created this cult around the double bill, the positioning of these movies alongside each other, I do think it's pulled a lot more people into the cinema to see Oppenheimer as part of that double bill and it being the thing to do, than would have otherwise gone to see it. And it's got an $80.5 million at box office, so it's almost recouped its production budget across its opening weekend, and it's the third biggest film of Christopher Nolan's filmography. It's his biggest original film. It was never going to beat The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises, given their franchise positioning in for revenue. So it's quite remarkable, really, that Oppenheimer has achieved that kind of success in his filmography, and especially because it's one of his more. It asks a lot more of the audience, I think, than a lot of his previous films. Maybe not as much as Tenet.
Tenet asked a lot of me. Tenet is still asking a lot of me. Every time I think about that film, my brain just goes, wait, what was it actually about?
And the problem is, I don't care enough to work it out.
I could not tell you the plot. I think I could as soon as I left it, but thinking about it now, I could not tell you what happened.
I could give you a rough outline.
You could.
I could give you a rough outline.
Yeah, but you're not regular people.
I am not your regular film viewer
you are
or cinema goer.
Cinema man. So we don't measure your memory abilities by my memory abilities.
By normal metrics.
Exactly. But anyway, back to Oppenheimer. I digress.
Yes. So to get into the actual plot and thoughts of Oppenheimer, so as I'm sure everyone is probably aware at this point, historical drama and biopic on the life and career of J. Robert Oppenheimer, who was a quantum physicist who was enlisted by the United States government as part of the Manhattan Project, which was a project as part of the sort of the nuclear arms race, which was prevalent in World War II, and sought to build a weapon that could, make the US the defining military power in World War II. And of course, as everyone knows, the history led to the creation of the atomic bomb that was then dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. essentially, I think in most people's retrospective opinion now, a sanctioned war crime that killed over 220,000 pretty much innocent people, mostly women and children. And the film takes obviously a non-linear structure, as is, Nolan, jumping around in time. No, really? And it jumps between Oppenheimer's formative years, his time at the Manhattan Project, and then also 2 hearings, one where his security clearance was up for debate and questioned later on, and a hearing from a rival of his, Strauss. His first name escapes me, but he enlisted him as part of a later scientific and military associated project, but then sought to tear him down because of his Oppenheimer's outspoken political sympathies and potential affiliation with the suspected affiliation with the Communist Party. It all kind of got wrapped up in the McCarthy trials of the 1960s. And Oppenheimer explores all those sections of history, and also Oppenheimer's own personal distress, trauma, and feelings on his work as part of the Manhattan Project and the moral implications that resulted from his actions and his involvement in the making of the atomic bomb, as it was not sold to him that it would be used in the way it eventually was. So,
sorry, just how did he think an atomic bomb was going to be used?
Well, there is that argument, of course, but I mean, interesting. I mean, from what I've heard, it's based on the book American Prometheus, and from what I've heard, Oppenheimer is a very accurate portrayal of history and his life, and it did appear that the atomic bomb was going to be used as sort of a deterrent, or at least it was going to be dropped in such a way as it would either be more of a combat play, or it would be dropped in such a way as that it would kind of have minimal damage to actual, human life and have minimal casualties, but it would sort of create an impression of this is what will happen if we drop it, if we choose to drop it on somewhere more populated. And of course, that wasn't actually what happened. So in terms of the actual film, there is so much in general to love about it. Cillian Murphy's performance is, for me, he's had an extraordinary career already, and amazing performances such as Tommy Shelby and Peaky Blinders, which I thought was sort of the defining moment of his career up until this point. But this is now, for me, the crowning achievement of his entire acting career. He's able to show such range in the various emotional states that occur throughout Oppenheimer's life, but he doesn't pronounce this to the degree where it would feel as though certain traits or feelings are suddenly spiking. He pitches everything at just the right level of kind of natural stability and reservation, whereby even at his most stressed and worn down, his portrayal feels nothing less than a completely immersive and organic portrayal of a deeply troubled man whose past and present feelings are in constant flux. That through line between his feelings and sort of certain timelines and the separate timelines of the film is so brilliantly built out and maintained across all these different sort of emotional states that it's such a thoroughly lived in performance. It's so, all the different emotions are so cohesively drawn together as part of this singular experience that Cillian Murphy is completely inhabiting and communicating on screen. Not since Casey Affleck in Manchester by the Sea have I seen an actor so powerfully use their physicality to display internal struggle and trauma. Cillian Murphy does it with such excellence here, is such a high caliber. And you look at the older Oppenheimer in the later timelines during the court hearings, and it's almost as though he's making his face literally physically sag from how much the government has worn him down and the colossal weight of the moral implications of his involvement in the Manhattan Project and the making of the bomb. In short, it's work that's richly deserving of a Best Actor Oscar nomination. I think he's a shoo-in for at least a nomination at this point, and it will probably go down as one of the most impactful leading acting performances of the year. It's you never believe for a second that you are watching anything other than the real Oppenheimer. It's quite a magnificent turn. And there's a myriad of other, acting royalty really on display in supporting roles, throughout Oppenheimer. Prominent characters through much of the plot, all the way down to one-scene cameos. In the interest of time and maintaining the surprises, I won't delve into
Basically, anyone who wasn't in Barbie ended up in Oppenheimer.
Yeah. Or Asteroid City, which we'll get onto later. Yeah, it really is just like they got all the remaining American and British acting talent and we're just like, you know what, let's just give a scene or two to every single one of them. And that's what's happened with Oppenheimer. So I won't delve too much into any of those guys, except to highlight the brilliance of Robert Downey Jr. Obviously, iconic leading man in the MCU as Iron Man. And because he's had such a prominent role as Iron Man, you forget when he's given like an original, dramatic role outside of that franchise, what a fantastic actor he is. And here as Strauss, he has such upright power and governmental heft, but he also has this pernicious, conniving manipulative side to him as he pulls the strings behind the scenes to ruin Oppenheimer. His performance actually seemed to me, and this is great praise, to channel the best elements of F. Murray Abraham's, Oscar-winning Turner's Salieri and Amadeus. That entire McCarthy hearings plotline in general reminded me tremendously of the contemptible antagonist-led narration in Amadeus, and that's a classic. So, great influence to cite there. So the nonlinear structure and shifting colors is really intelligently utilized. It communicates these really smart shifts in perspective from Oppenheimer's POV to the more government-leaning derisive view as they're trying to tarnish his name and sort of, trying to defame him and not really take into account his own feelings as a person. And that point of view is communicated by the black and white and how they swap as we jump between the different timelines. Early on, the timeline switch with such speed and velocity that it can give you sort of narrative whiplash a little bit, but you do eventually settle into it. There's a particularly genius use of a recurring scene featuring a conversation between two characters and how that conversation is interpreted by two different parties, amounting to a fantastic summation of the film's sort of final themes and central moral conflict when that scene repeats towards the end of 3-hour runtime. There are several really incredible sequences that pull us so vividly into Oppenheimer's subjectivity. You feel his emotions and discomfort on an almost like genetic level. These brisk edits between close-ups of Cillian Murphy's face with inserts of starscapes, supernovas and scientific reactions in space accompanied by these gorgeously bright ambient synth chords from the score, these overwhelming blasts of distortion in the sound mix, these amazing ascending horn melodies. The score is, really, it's just epic, isn't even the word. The amazing sound design, it combines these really deafening walls of noise. There's a really brilliant use of stamping that begins as though it sounds as applause, but it's flipped by Nolan in a later scene to become something intensely claustrophobic and really kind of horrifying. He drops the sound out at moments of celebration and bomb testing to make those actions feel kind of hollow and eerie, especially when viewed within the context of the destruction the bomb caused. It's really great to see Christopher Nolan, a director who has often communicated complex narrative ideas through very mechanical exposition and heavy dialogue, so sharply communicating the protagonist's inner struggle through visual and sonic storytelling. So that's all great. And overall, I would say Oppenheimer is a really, really impressive film. I don't think it's quite the masterpiece that some people are making out to be, and I don't think it quite lives up to the monumental hype that's been sort of laboured on it by the critics. And there's two main reasons for that for me. One is that the two main female characters, played by Florence Pugh and Emily Blunt, are given really short shrift within the screenplay. I know you've said a lot in the past about how Christopher Nolan doesn't really know how to write female characters, and Oppenheimer does not help that case at all, really. Florence Pugh's character is nude for several scenes and doesn't really need to be, which is a little bit concerning. And is pretty much completely inconsequential to the narrative. You can cut her out and you would lose pretty much nothing.
She's Florence Pugh.
Emily Blunt's character I know, so underutilized. It's gutting. It's really, really gutting. And so yeah, I just feel like she's woefully underdeveloped. Kitty Oppenheimer, Robert Oppenheimer's wife, played by Emily Blunt, fares a bit better, but even then, their relationship isn't really fully fleshed out, and her character is mainly defined by her trauma. She's not really given much in the way of agency, which is pretty disappointing to see. And given his past track record with problematic writing of underdeveloped female characters, it kind of makes it feel a bit more egregious here. The fact that it's not very well done. So that's one point, and that I think is less sort of problematic in the grand scheme of the film in terms of my enjoyment of it than the other point. My other qualm with it is that for how incredible the scenes of Oppenheimer's subjectivity are, and how big a deal Christopher Nolan made of the film being from his point of view, and how he wrote the script in first person, how all the other actors were supporting that perspective, I feel as though there are large sections of the film where it loses sight of that. It's at its most emotionally engaging and technically impressive when we lean into those experimental sequences that make Oppenheimer, that bring his point of view and how he views the world front and center, and makes us feel, on an elemental level, those emotions and distress. And where, Nolan experiments with his usual techniques. It's a shame that the film overall leans much heavier on the sections relaying the historical details of the bomb constructions and the trial, rather than focusing on the psychological toll that it took on Oppenheimer. And that's not to say those sequences aren't really well written. He injects like an Aaron Sorkin Social Networks, level of pace, and relentlessly paced, sort of aggression and whip smart, backwards and forwards, exchanges between the actors, and that stuff. The dialogue pops, it snaps, it's very intelligent, and it's really well paced. You don't really feel the 3-hour runtime, and it's of course extraordinarily well acted. I just felt like it felt like a slightly more inventive take on a very standard historical drama that just happened to be very, very technically proficient. And I feel like those subjective sequences of Cillian Murphy's perspective are so powerful, and some of the best sequences that Christopher Nolan has ever put to film. I feel like if they had featured much, much more throughout, then we really could have been talking about one of the best films of Christopher Nolan's filmography in maybe the past few years. That's not to say I don't still think it's a 2023 highlight overall, but I would say it fell slightly short of the expectations and the hype that the critics set out for me. But I would still say that it's well worth seeing. I would give it a really solid A. I think I was wanting it to be an A+, but didn't quite reach that for me. I would still say it's great. It's just not quite the masterpiece I was maybe expecting or hoping for going in, but it's still very, very impressive. It will be a hard sell for some because of how heavy on dialogue it is, but it's still a very, very impressive work, and it's great to see, a history and morally driven dialogue heavy blockbuster, still being able to make waves at the box office and reach a mass audience like
Absolutely,
this.
Yeah. And I think it's an interesting one because it was hyped up so much because they had that trailer where they barely showed anything, and it was just that it was a Christopher Nolan film, and it was called Oppenheimer, and everyone was like, oh my God. So I think, when you're kind of like conducting that level of hype around it's hard to know what to expect, but I mean, I'm still intrigued by it. I'm still going to see it, even though, by the time I do get to see it, the whole the hype train will have definitely passed. But I'm still intrigued by it. I am just thinking, you're talking about those like sequences where they bring you into Oppenheimer's like frame of mind, and I just think of those memes about people that have been sat too close to the screen at the cinema. And they just got like a massive view of like just Cillian Murphy's chin. Just his face.
There's a lot of close-ups of his face. You're gonna see more of like Cillian Murphy's like skin and like hair follicles like on his chin than you ever will if you like sit front row of the IMAX at this.
So moving on from Oppenheimer, we're going to go now to its twin, its partner in crime, Bonnie to its Clyde, and that is Barbie. I've seen it. I love it. I want to know what you thought. Did this best Oppenheimer for you? Well, first of all, did you do a double bill?
I didn't do the double bill. It wasn't
I was
quite.
going to ask what order.
It wasn't quite logistically possible with some work and social things I had going on. I did want to do the double bill, but I've never seen the cinema that busy as I did when I went to see Oppenheimer. My God! So Oppenheimer was Saturday night. Then I drove back to Devon to see Barbie with a friend who specifically requested my presence.
You're in
at the
demand.
Barbie screening. I'm a hot commodity. What can I say? Off the back of the test screen. And yes, that was Sunday morning. So it wasn't quite the double bill, but it was soon after. And oh boy, I have thoughts on Barbie. When it was
Off you go.
when
Give it me.
it was first announced, and saw the brand behind Barbie were going to be prominently involved, I did not think that a film about the Barbie doll was going to amount to much more than maybe like a nostalgic glittery romp that would not appeal to me in the slightest. But then I saw the two dynamite words, Greta Gerwig, and I was like, oh, my interest has peaked, and realised there was hope yet. And what I sincerely hoped we would get was like the vibrant aesthetic and atmosphere of the Barbie brand, housing a sharp commentary on how that toy is viewed today and its influence on gender politics and views on femininity, even if that wasn't entirely positive. Considering the history of how the Barbie doll has peddled some unrealistic stereotypes of what a woman in inverted commas should be. And I could not have anticipated that even with Greta Gerwig's involvement, and I love the woman, I worship the filmmaking ground she works on with Lady Bird and Little Women, French Kiss, what? And I could not have anticipated that Barbie would be able to so amazingly balance being wildly entertaining, supremely funny, and yet really thematically profound, technically proficient, and actually really moving. Like, this movie is like the literal definition, the total embodiment of cinematic embodiment of the phrase "has its cake and eats it too." It ticks like every single box you could hope for a summer blockbuster or a more auteur-focused work to do. And like, firstly, you cannot talk about Barbie without first mentioning the production design and the set dressing. Oh my Lord, heaven have mercy, Jesus H. Christ Almighty. The sets are to die for. I don't think it's like physically possible to have more pink in like a single place. And I mean,
Bet
they caused
tried.
like
Bet they tried.
I mean, they caused an international shortage of pink paint in order to paint the sets. I mean, if that's not dedication, I don't know what the hell is. And it's so well realized and vivid. Like you feel like it could be actually lived in. But even then, despite it feeling so lived in, it still has that smack of artificiality and artificial. It looks like a toy world. It has that whacked out artistry on full display from the art department, but it has that tactile human touch of like the plasticity that harks back to like the charming set constructions that kind of look fake but also look really magical, and like a world that's been constructed in movies like The Wizard of Oz. Greta Gerwig cited that influence in interviews. And it also serves the narrative purpose of like challenging the stereotypical perfection-laced display of femininity and masculinity with Ken and Barbie. There are multiple hilarious and legitimately catchy musical numbers. It's really cine literate, which I of course love. There's a really funny gag about the blue pill, red pill trope from The Matrix, and how Barbie just doesn't want to adhere to that. She's like, no, you got to do this one. And Barbie's like, no, I don't want to do that. It's like, well, you got to. You haven't actually got a choice. I'm just making it look like you do, because that's the trope.
There's like Kate McKinnon in this film. I don't always. I love Kate McKinnon as a performer. I love her on SNL, but I haven't liked her in films much. I find that she usually plays the same kind of character. In Barbie, she just had to show up, and I laughed. She was on form in this film.
The haircut and like the
so
flips,
good.
The flips she does and the splits to like navigate the house are just this. That's the thing. There's great verbal comedy. There's great sight gags. There's great slapstick and visual humor. Like every style of, there's great satire. There's filmic references. Like every style of humor is just so well executed here. There's a great gag about they're trying to distract people and they go, "Tell them you haven't watched The Godfather," which is just like me personified. There's like
killed me. I was just.
Yeah.
I was just.
My friend like was laughing next to me because she's like, "That's just you." Yeah. There's a reference to The Shining. There's a reference to the Zack Snyder cut of Justice League. There's an opening parody of the Dawn of Man scene from 2001: A Space Odyssey with this very wry, sardonic narration from Helen Mirren that is just absolutely golden. I sent Louise, my friend who I saw it with, the Dawn of Man scene from 2001: A Space Odyssey to her on YouTube, and I didn't give her any context. I'm like, this is going to seem random as hell, but trust me, stick with it. There is a reason. She was like, care to enlighten me as to what the hell I just watched? Because that's 4 minutes of my life I'm never getting back. I was like, no, just stick with me on this one, all will be revealed. And literally, the first shot came up, and she just looked at me like, oh. So that was a wonderful little serendipitous moment. The performances from the entire cast so beautifully balanced. Feeling fake and mannered, and the flawless fakery and perfect behavior of the inhabitants of Barbie Land because they're dolls. And then they bring in like genuine vulnerability, and you empathize with them. I mean, I was empathizing with dolls, man. What did this movie do to me? Margot Robbie's brilliant. She's able to embody like peerless, ecstatic glee and bountiful chirpiness in the earlier sections where she's like blissfully unaware of the outside world. And then the fact that she then executes this beautiful transition over the course of the runtime through grief, anxiety, despair, acceptance, inspiration, and then hope is such a remarkable display of acting, and gives the Barbie character a distinct arc. A Barbie doll has an arc, man.
All of my Barbie dolls had arcs. That's what I love about it.
Yeah, they did.
Just like, when you played with them on your own, they went through character development, because that's like in your head. And I love how they reference that with kind of like the doll as a reflection of the person who's playing with them. I thought that was really clever.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll get onto the script points in a second, but first, we have to mention Ryan Gosling.
Oh my God, Oscar nomination!
Nomination! Best supporting actor. We are manifesting it now. The campaign is already in swing. We are making this happen.
He was Kenneth.
He was Kenneth. Oh my God, I saw that on the jumper and I was rolling. I was wheezing. The kids must have been going, "What the hell is he laughing at?" I'm just like, you don't understand. You do not understand.
Get it?
If the phrase "Yas Queen" was rendered as an acting performance, it would take the form of Ryan Gosling and Barbie. Sublime. That was such a good line. I did not know what he was going to say, and he just burst out with that, and I was like,
one of my favorite quotes is, "The horse is just an extension of the man."
It's just, I'm going to beat you off.
I'm going to beat you up. And then also, what was the other horse one? It was, as soon as I learned that patriarchy wasn't about horses, I lost interest. Oh my God.
The comedic lines in this film is so unbelievably sharp. They're just, I'm going to see my gynecologist. I could quote it for hours. And in particular, Ryan Gosling's comedic timing and airheaded, clueless line delivery is perfection.
Just his face.
He gets the swagger.
Just his face in this film made me laugh. Like, there's a bit where they're having like this massive dance party, and then it cuts to the Kens like watching them. And I laughed out loud just from his face, just from his like a watching face.
Yeah, just all of his mannerisms, all of his physicality, and how he gets like the really sort of just ridiculous machismo. He gets the swagger, he gets the bravado, but like, is it in this feeling of ridicule and like farcical splendor that's like achingly hilarious? But then again, he makes you feel for him. He gets the hurt, he gets the pain. He makes Ken have layers. He gives him depth. Who would have thought?
Alan as well. Can we just talk about Michael Cera for a second?
Yes, we need to just give Alan a voice.
I haven't seen that boy in anything for so long, and it was just a delight to see him on screen again. And he is, again, still just so funny. Alan, we didn't deserve Alan. He's too precious for this world. And the thing is, I love all of the references. I'm sure you'll go into this, but like being someone who like grew up with Barbies, grew up with the Barbie films and things like that, and kind of I knew that there was like, Ken had a friend called Alan, but there was only one Alan. And I was like, that was an actual doll that happened. And just like all these references to some of the different Kens that were made, they just had me rolling because like, I've seen videos about them or things like that. It's just...
like the cutaway to Depression Barbie, I was in stitches. Anxiety and panic attacks sold separately. Yeah, and that's the thing, like, all of this that I've previously said is like absolutely just invigorating. It's super well made. It's visually just eye-popping. It's so funny. It's such a joyous display of like great physical and verbal performance. But the real star of Barbie is like the sharpness of Greta Gerwig's screenplay. You know, the parallels in the gender inequality in Barbie Land, between Barbie Land and the real world, how Ken interprets the patriarchy in the real world and then tries to bring it back into Barbie world because it actually serves him more in the real world, and how then Barbie brushes up against how women have been oppressed and has to kind of come to terms with how Barbie as a brand and a doll actually did. You know, there's a great line where they say, "You set the feminist movement back 50 years," and it's so wonderfully able to. It's Greta Gerwig is just this genius, like how she's taken an established intellectual property, an established IP, she's deconstructed the ubiquity of Barbie, reframed it. You know, she's taken a look at how it influenced and maybe spawned some sort of toxic views of womanhood and femininity and masculinity as well. But she's also gone, it doesn't have to be that way. You know, we can now use this doll and also just have it can be a reflection of ourselves, but we can use it as a form of celebration to celebrate all our individuality and our skills and our strength and our, you know, our trials and tribulation and challenges and success in everyday lives as being and existing as women. And it just made so many incredibly relevant points on gender and existing in today's society that just, I mean, I have seen some criticisms leveled at Barbie in that it's not particularly subtle in its messaging, but when the entire
Barbie.
film is so visual,
right?
It's Barbie, yeah.
Barbie is not known for subtlety.
No, and when you have a film that's this visually extravagant and like it's extravagant so tonally and dialogue wise, and then you know is over the top in every conceivable way, you know, you have to have some quite overt messaging, and I think speechifying is too strong, but you need to be very sort of open-handed with your messaging in order to make it cut through all that. And I think it was perfectly judged. And the use of the Billie Eilish song as a recurring motif and as a thematic sort of touchstone, and how that's used in sort of the pivotal scene at the very end of the film, it was just unbelievably moving. And I cried. I shed a tear. Who would have thought I would say that about a Barbie film? But it just speaks to what an intelligent satire it is and how much it, you know, I remember saying about Joker, how that used an established franchise to get a big audience and then made a really relevant point about how we treat people with mental health issues in society. This essentially does the same thing, but it uses a toy brand that's going to pull everyone into the cinema and everybody knows. And it makes some really relevant points on gender and womanhood and how we, you know, respecting women and trying to be more equal in how we, you know, treat, you know, gender equality. And I can't really say anything bad about Barbie. You know, I just, outside of maybe wanting a little bit more resolution for Alan. I mean, but who doesn't? It's. I mean, I know you can't really compare them, but this to me is clearly the stronger film out of Barbie and Oppenheimer. It's not really fair to compare them because they're completely different, but this is the one I prefer. And not just in an entertainment sense, I think it achieves what it sets out to do in a more effective manner than Oppenheimer does.
Fantastic.
And it's getting the A+. It's
that
getting
makes
top
me
marks.
So incredibly happy. You don't know. I've got a massive smile on my face because you've given that an A+. Thank you for doing that. Just made me think of because there's a line in the film when they're kind of talking about gender and the Kens are like because the Kens are basically what take the position of women in our current society, and there's like a voiceover bit that goes, one day the Kens will have the same amount of rights as women do in the real world. Oh.
The whole cinema, I mean, aside from the little kids, howled at that bit. And I've seen some reviews that just were like, oh, it's man hating, it's doesn't give the men a platform, it only gives the women a platform. It's like, no, did you watch the same film that we did? You know, that's the thing. It is even handed. It doesn't forget to elevate the men and make sure that the message is about equality rather than just being squarely on women.
Yeah,
and
Ken has like
another
a full
real
arc.
success.
Ken
of it
goes
too.
through, you know, a full thing, and I like that. because it's really funny, but it's also a good message about, not being dependent on another person for your own happiness. And I love the way that they did that. And there was a moment. So there's a moment near the end of the film. I don't want to spoil it, but everybody's kind of waving slowly. And in my screening, everybody did that.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody in the cinema started this slow wave along with the Barbies. I'm like, that's the moment I knew, oh, this film's here to stay. This is a midnight screening film that's going to be a cult classic. People are going to be it's going to be like Rocky Horror. People are going to be shouting things at the screen. This is going to last. And I really think it will. I think it's going to become, maybe it's too popular to call it a cult classic, but I think as time goes on, it will live on because it's just so iconic. So,
100%.
moving on then from Barbie, we have the much anticipated Asteroid City. We're a bit late to the party on this one, but that's because we've been away for the holidays. I'm really intrigued to hear what you thought of this. I'm a massive Wes Anderson fan. So without giving too much away, what did you think?
As am I. Well, so Asteroid City essentially focuses on a writer who has written a play about a grieving father who travels with his very quirky in a Wes Anderson film. No, really? His tech-obsessed and science-obsessed family to a very small rural village called Asteroid City, well, rural town, in what looks to be kind of, Arizona, New Mexico kind of area, and right in the middle of the desert, to compete in a junior stargazing event. Your plethora of Wes Anderson regulars, showing up. Jason Schwartzman, Jeffrey Wright, Bryan Cranston shows up as well, and Liev Schreiber turns up, Hope Davis, Maya Hawke, Bryan Cranston, Tom Hanks, Scarlett Johansson as well, Ed Norton, mainstay, just the most stacked cast imaginable. And they gather in this small town that is eventually quarantined due to the arrival of extraterrestrial influences. And the design of the alien was very sort of made me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. It was sort of a wonderful little bit of a practical effects ingenuity, and was put a smile on my face, which I wish the rest of the film did. So Wes Anderson is obviously famous for his highly stylized and symmetrical directorial style. And whilst it's incredibly eye-catching, the more his filmography progresses, and I liked The French Dispatch, but it felt like it lacked sort of a clear character and emotional through line. And I get that wasn't the point of it. It was sort of more of a tribute to sort of the power of journalism, but it did feel like it was missing an emotional core that would have made that film more memorable and engaging to me, even though it was kind of entertaining in a sort of a short-term anthology sense. As his filmography progresses, the more I realise that it's the soulful character interaction that intertwines with the arch quirk and symmetry that makes it all work and synergize. In Moonrise Kingdom and The Royal Tenenbaums, how mannered and meticulously structured the design is. It mirrors the uptight manner of the society and world that the film is, taking place within the confines of. And then the human drama that portrays the heart that blossoms in spite of those rigid contrasts. You kind of need, unless he somehow finds a new way to do it, you kind of need one in order to make the other work, for me anyway. And as time has progressed, I feel like Wes Anderson's kind of lost sight of that, and he's delved deeper into the rabbit hole of indulgence and self-parody at the risk of alienating even his most dedicated long-time fans, like you and myself. And sadly, for me, that's what happens in spades with Asteroid City. The film, it sort of put its worst foot forward. It begins with this conceit of a TV show that's documenting the making of the play that then forms the main plot line for Asteroid City. So it's kind of a play within a TV show, like within a movie. There's like three layers of conceit and
Grand Budapest
here.
Got like layers of story in a story in a story.
Yeah, but at least that's kind of, flashbacks and being told by the characters. So at least it's coming from the characters that are existing within this world. What the meta layers of Asteroid City did for me, it served to highlight the artifice way more than I wanted it to. And it already had, as soon as it started, it already had me going, oh no, and rolling my eyes. because to have, multiple layers of fourth wall meta clowning, it just serves to distance me completely from the action. It put me at arm's length for basically the entire duration of the film. And having the constant reminder of the chapter structure, which doesn't really do anything to inform the film structurally or narratively, and cutting back to the play rehearsals and the narrator of the TV show, directly addressing the camera, it fragments the narrative. And also the constant reminder of the plot line in the Asteroid City, the town, basically being fake, it completely sucks any sense of stakes or immersion or tension out of the film entirely. And it just made it exceedingly uninvolving to me. That's not to mention, the way that it fragments the plot. So a significant portion of the runtime has its attention diverted away from the events in the town of Asteroid City. It just lessens my investment in that part even more. So, early on, I'm kind of wanting to get back to Asteroid City, but past a certain point, I'm just like, what? I just don't care. And there isn't much in the way of a substantial thematic justification for that, and for so blatantly frequently spotlighting the artifice of the story. And there's a very half-hearted approach of a message about carrying on in life in spite of not always knowing life's answers. But that to me felt like a very poor excuse for justifying the indulgences. And even though the events in the town feel stilted, and they feel uneventful beyond belief, the characters' arch and robotic behavior is elevated to such a degree from Wes Anderson's previous films. It made the film really patience testing for me. And I think overall, I don't really have a lot else to say about it other than that, because that essentially covered my entire viewing experience. It's thematically and narratively pretty hollow. It feels long at 95 minutes, and that's not good. And it's visually very pretty to look at, and the set's well constructed, and there's clearly a lot of stars that were relishing being in the Wes Anderson film. But overall, I thought this was Wes Anderson, at his most soulless and inconsequential. I would go straight down the middle and give it a C+. It's not outright bad in its execution, but it's just. I came out of it feeling like I'd achieved absolutely nothing in watching it.
Which is not really what you want to be feeling after coming out of a movie. Because, you essentially have lost 2 hours that you're never going to get back. So you at least want to feel like you've gained something out of that experience. Yeah, it's a shame. There was a big, I know a few people who went. There was a big display of the sets and things that you could go and visit in London and walk around, which looked really interesting. And the production design has always been something that I've been very drawn to about Wes Anderson's films. Wes Anderson is one of the directors that got me really invested in film, or at least getting invested in the behind the scenes, how things work together. Part of it, I think Grand Budapest was a massive part of that, sort of like sparking that curiosity in me. It's kind of a shame to hear that it's kind of gone a bit soulless. And I guess it depends from what side you're coming at it from, because I think we're people who have seen pretty much all of Wes Anderson's back catalogue, whereas there'll be a few people that I think are discovering him for the first time just because of the kind of moment in pop culture where people have been kind of recreating his style with AI and things like that. And there'll be people coming to this, without the context of what Wes Anderson can do with a screenplay. I think maybe people coming to it with fresh eyes will have a different experience. Maybe. I think maybe we're too bitter. We've seen too much of the world.
Yes. I think with without the high watermark of things like the Royal Tenenbaums in Grand Budapest and Rushmore and Moonrise Kingdom, I think people will find a lot of superficial, instantaneous, in the moment glee and sort of wonder in his, very, very distinct visual style if they're coming to his filmography for the first time. I think knowing what he can do with the emotional depths of the screenplay, just highlights to me how much this kind of falls short of that. So yeah, I think there will be various different experiences that I had with this, but for me, being familiar with his back catalogue, it just didn't measure up at all to those
final
previous
review of our comeback episode, our return The Return of the Kings. We've got Mission Impossible, another one, another mission that is probably not impossible. I assume that, they achieve it at the end, unless I'm mistaken. Anyway, so another probable mission. What did you think?
But yes, how many impossible missions can one team solve before the government are like, you know what? It probably isn't anything that's impossible anymore. But then we wouldn't have one of the preeminent action franchises in Hollywood now, would we? So Dead Reckoning Part 1, the 7th entry in the long-running Mission Impossible franchise, a franchise where we see perhaps the biggest commitment in filmmaking today of capturing, stunts and action sequences in camera outside of Christopher Nolan. And I applaud Tom Cruise's and the rest of the cast's commitment to that. I think it's great to, see them kind of reject green screen and go, no, we are just going to drive a motorcycle off a mountain. Because I would love to have seen the risk assessment for that shoot. And I hadn't seen any of the Mission Impossible films prior to watching this one until the weekend before, because I binged all 6 in preparation for this, because I wanted to be able to compare.
What was that?
And it was interesting. First one's decent, second one's tedious, and then but there are some really good ones. 5, pretty much everything from 3 onwards. I think 3 is underrated. 4's really good. 5 and 6 are terrific. And I think this continues the tradition. And I think there is a solid argument that this is the strongest one. I'm flip-flopping between this one and 5 as being my favourite, because I think, nobody's really coming to Mission Impossible for the plot, are they? But I do think that Mission Impossible does fare best when you do have a bit more thought and a bit more sort of building out going on in terms of the espionage side of things, to give more stakes, to put the characters in an interesting, logistical and conflict position. And I think Rogue Nation, which is the 5th one, a lot of people prefer Fallout number 6 to 5. I prefer 5 to 6 because I think it does have terrific action that has interesting geography and choreography in terms of, the spaces that they're inhabiting those action sequences in. But it also has really interesting kind of interplay between the characters and, the different government organizations and how they're backstabbing each other. It feels more fleshed out and more kind of attention's been given to the character interaction than previous entries. And I think whilst Dead Reckoning Part 1 doesn't quite achieve that level as Rogue Nation does, I think it does the second best job after that film in the franchise of doing that. And actually, I think it does the best job of doing like real-time weaving that interaction between the characters into the set pieces. There's and which is great because it gives really solid narrative justification for why those set pieces are happening, which you always want. You don't want to feel like you're globe trotting aimlessly. You want to feel like it's motivated, and these feel like the most motivated missions and action sequences of the franchise, even if the interplay
That's
isn't
one of the problems I had with the
tense.
later James Bond entries. The fact that they'd kind of turn up in a country for no reason. It's like seemingly no reason. Like there was always like this underlying thread, but I think Spectre was the worst for this, where I was like, why are you there? Why there? Why
are we at the Day of the Dead?
Yeah,
because it
I'm
looks
just like,
cool.
why are we here now? And we're going there. Why are we going there?
Why am I walking over? Why am I walking over the top of this building? Because we just wanted to put a big unbroken Steadicam shot in. That's why. Forget the plot. It's Bond. Yeah. Yes, I think Dead Reckoning Part 1 does that really well. And I think the set pieces, outside of the mountain jump and the train sequence, I don't think it pushes the audacity boundary in terms of the action quite as hard as maybe, a helicopter chase in Fallout. Oh my God, that one's ridiculous. But I do think that what this does, that I think is particularly impressive when you position it in the whole franchise, is that the set pieces are multi-layered. And by that, I mean, you've got like 3 different separate threads of action going on at any one time that sort of, and the edit is really cohesively and fluidly bouncing between them. I don't want to spoil the events of each specific through line, but there's a great multi-layered set piece, kind of multi-staged action sequence in Abu Dhabi airport, or is it Dubai International Airport? It's one of the two. It's a large airport that's taking place in, and Simon Pegg is in one place, Haley Atwell's in another, Bing Rames in another, Tom Cruise in another, and there's 3 separate threads, and they're independent of each other, but you're cutting between them at just the right points, keep spiking the tension and it's just seeing this sort of dance and, balletic sort of structure of an action sequence that, balances, multiple different conflicts to keep, the tension high and to keep things new and interesting and constantly developing. I think it is a feat of action movie filmmaking. And there are sequences with like darker atmospheres, dialogue scenes where it's kind of shrouded in darkness, the camera's a bit tighter, it's a bit more close, a bit more intimate. I think the directorial style is the most intimate it's been throughout the franchise, and more sort of dramatic, contrast heavy lighting that I think makes things graver and injects a greater sense of stakes into this one than has previously been apparent in earlier entries. And I'd have to rewatch 5 to like make a full-blown decision about which one is my favorite, but I think there's a very strong, like I said, strong argument that this is the strongest film in the franchise, and it's almost as long as Oppenheimer. Actually, it's 2 hours and 35 minutes as opposed to 2:53 or 55 as Oppenheimer was, and it breezes by. I mean, maybe in the last 5-10 minutes I was kind of thinking, okay, this needs to wrap up, and then it pretty much did, and as you want with any part 1, it has its own sort of full cohesive arc that it's got a very sort of strong ending and beginning that sort of tie back into each other, so it very nicely, good bit of script writing there, bit of elevated screenplay work in the franchise, and made sure that this sort of ties together as its own cohesive film, but you can clearly see where the plot is headed and where sort of the space is to be filled in Dead Reckoning Part 2. And I, for one, I'm very excited to see the franchise conclude, I believe, with that 8.
Is that it? Is that going to be the last one?
I would give this
the 8.
I believe it is.
Will they though?
Don't quite will they though? They might still, squeeze some more money out of it. But given how consistent and frequently improving the franchise has been, I would be more adverse to that than another Fast and Furious.
But look what they did to Indiana Jones.
We're talking about that next week. I haven't seen Indiana Jones yet, but we will get that. No, it's all right. No, I saw the reviews out of Cannes. I've heard both sides of the fence. I am well aware. We will have to see which side of the fence I fall on. But yes, A- for Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1.
And that is it for this week. So, what have we got to look forward to next week?
We got, well, of course, as I just said, we have Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. See if this rebooting of the franchise was indeed worth it. We've got another one of the most anticipated, sort of a later and retrospective review of one of 2023's most anticipated releases, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, great big thrilling animated romp. We will see how it compares to the original, a new, very frightening and sharp looking A24 independent horror film called Talk to Me, and season 2 of one of 2022's best shows, and I think a solid contender for the best current show on TV now that Succession's ended. The Bear season 2 is returning, and I, for one, could not be more excited. We'll be back with all of that next week.
A shufty on with watching The Bear season 2. We're going to blitz it this week. That's it. We are holding ourselves to account right here, right now. We're reviewing it next week. We've got to get through it.
10 eps.
To be fair, I'll get through it very quick. I really enjoyed the last season, so I'm sure that's not going to be too much of a challenge. So that's everything. It's been, as always, a pleasure to hear your reviews, Billy, and we will be back next week with all of those lovely things. And please leave us a review if you are listening on Apple, and please share the word. Share the word? Share the word. What's the word, bird? And share the word.
It's on your motto. Share the word.
If you enjoyed listening to the podcast today, please tell your friends. Word of mouth, get us out there. We really enjoy making these episodes, and I think the intention is to keep doing so until we get bored, which might take a while.
Absolutely. Oh, it will.
And we will see you all next week. Bye.
Bye.